Hello, everyone. Jonathan here from the Land Method. Happy to be here with you today for another episode of Crushing Land. And we're going to tackle a subject today that's been coming up quite a bit, basically just in the last week or so. But it's been coming up quite a bit. And apparently, it's in a lot of different land investing forums or groups or whatever it is that you want to call them that are out there and putting information out. And that is basically the situation of the market as we're completing 2024 here, going into 2025, what is working, what is not working, what the situations are, what the scenarios are. And basically, a lot of people kind of viewing it as hopeless and that they're jumping ship and that they don't really see things coming up, uh, getting better, and that they have to move on and go to something else. And in all honesty, this is something that myself and Genus have been talking about openly right here on this channel and in our group and other things that was going to happen. And a lot of that is based on the real estate cycle and where the real estate cycle currently is and what it's currently doing has a lot of people, like I said, jumping ship. And the reason for that is simply because when they got involved in land investing and how they got involved in land investing, and they basically are what we've deemed as COVID investors. They came in during the pandemic, started doing it from home, really only knew that market. And so, because of that, now as things are shifting and there's adaptation needed, it's not something that they're used to, for one. Two, it involves more work, so they're not necessarily willing to put it in. And three, that's happening is that it's just not as easy, right? As it was. It was like they had a very certain way that they did things that was so simple. And now that's not working. And it's funny because I've had a few different people reach out to me that are, our students or part of our group and then are in others as well. And they've heard a few different things. And I jotted some of them down that they had mentioned. And we're going to kind of tackle those today just to help you with it. So one of the things that they were talking about was assignment deals. And that assignment deals just are not as plentiful as they used to be. There was people that were doing assignment deals before with builders, and they were assigning deals left and right, and they were doing multiple ones, per month. And now they may have multiple months where they don't do any. So from multiple per month to multiple months with none. So that was something that came up. Another one that came up was that somebody put out there that they've basically been out of the game for a while because they have been restructuring their entire business because what they were doing wasn't working. And basically the way that you needed to start looking at things now, if you wanted to be successful, was taking on more complex deals, right? Taking on bigger things, ones with more moving parts than what existed before. Another one that's come out is ditching all the low end stuff. The low end deals don't work anymore. Nobody's buying them. Nobody's interested in them because the buyers for those people, the users for those kind of properties, are ones that don't have money right now. And so if they don't have any money, then they're not going to be able to move forward. They're not going to purchase them. And so they just sit there stagnant. They don't move. And then obviously focusing on higher end stuff and financing it and higher end stuff, and also looking at ways to work with those properties, title them, subdivide them, whatever it may be. So we're going to talk about all those things right now and what the reality is, because there's a lot of truth in what is being said there. But the reason that is truth is because of the way it's being looked at. And one of the things that I often talk about is that maybe that you've noticed this is that your perspective, your view of something, right? The perspective of the situation is often based on how you are actually viewing it, as opposed to the reality of the situation. And sometimes you got to take a step back and you need to look at things from a different perspective. One of the illustrations that I've used before and other things that I talk about is that of climbing a mountain, right? If you're at the base of a mountain and you stare up at it, you might look at this thing and say, well, this thing's huge, it's enormous. There's no way I can get up it. There's cliffs, there's ravines, there's all these different things. And you know what? That is 100% accurate from the viewpoint that you're taking. But if you step back and you look at it from a different view, if you look at it from the well laid out trail, if you look at it from the meandering approach, instead of just tackling it straight on, but meandering around and slowly working your way up and going out miles and going up switchbacks and all of these different things, well, then there's a laid out plan and it actually is something that you can tackle. So, right, your perspective has to change. And that's what the case is when it comes to these land investing situations here as we're moving forward. So, the first one I mentioned was the assignments and builders drying up. We've been talking about that for months, a year now, probably, that was going to be the case, right? That is one of your best buying groups if you have properties that fit. But when the economy starts to shift, their interest in stocking up on properties, in holding them, in doing all of those things, especially on the higher end, and being able to assign them to them and make these fat assignment fees goes away very quickly. So what we're seeing there is nothing surprising. Now, if you got involved in land in the last few years, all you knew was a market where these builders were gobbling up these properties. But that's not the case anymore. And it wasn't the case a few years ago. So that being said, having these assignment fees disappear, that's something that we fully anticipated and knew were going to come up. And yes, there was no way that was going to be sustainable. Looking at it from the perspective of you need to get more complex is absolutely not true. Yes, there is less competition in more complex deals. There's a reason for that, right? It's right in the description of it, right? It's more complex. So the fact that it's more complex is why there's less competition, right? But the problem is with complexity is a lot of times those things don't come together. And so you have to be looking at it from the perspective of a couple different perspectives. One, you have to be looking at it, well, I'm going to be putting in a lot of time in trying to get this thing done, or a lot of effort, or a lot of money in having other people do it, or something that may not come together. And so because of that, you have to have multiple ones of them working at the same time, which means more capital, it means more time, it means more effort, all of those things, right? So you have to have that realization. The other thing is there obviously has to be a substantial profit margin, because if you're working with more complex deals and it's lower end properties, there's nowhere to go. You get a piece of property that's worth $50,000, but you have all of these different things involved in it. You basically better be getting that property for nothing, because if you are not, by the time you put forth all your effort into it, there's nothing left for profit in it. And so getting more complex is not something that obviously is something that can work for everybody, and it's not something that you need to do. You don't have to get more complex. You just need to change the way that you view your strategies and things and other things. Lower end deals no longer working. Well, I just won a property under contract today for $16,500. Bought it for $5,000. So there's an example right there of a lower end deal that we just did. Now, I will say one thing about the lower end deals. A couple things actually. One, most of our buyers are not owner financing them anymore. Why is that the case? Because they're not the person that's going to plan on using it for their end purpose, right? They're not the ultimate buyer on that property. Who we are selling these to are builders that are still looking because they're looking to get a deal. Now, these are lots that were worth substantially more not that long ago. So some builders are sitting on these properties because they're not that expensive. So they'll sit on them and use them in the future. Along with that is also just other investors. There's people that came out in 2000. This all happened in 2008. Things started to crash, and then people came out and they went out and they bought these properties and sat on them because they said, you know what? These properties were worth tens of thousands of dollars, and now they're worth substantially less. I'm going to go out and I'm going to buy them right now, and we're going to sell them in a decade, right? So they're looking at it from the more well-known strategy that people usually take for investing, right? Because investing is usually more of a long-term thing in most people's minds. And so they're looking at it from the perspective of, hey, this lot, for the one, for example, that I had there, it's a $16,000 lot. But you know what? That lot, I can really see it as the economy shifts up in 10 years being a $40,000 lot. So I'm going to invest this now so that I can make that money. So we're still selling a lot of these properties. We're just selling them to a different clientele than we were before. Now, when it comes to the higher end properties and needing to owner finance them, I don't see that as being true either, right? When it comes to higher end properties, the buyers are still the buyers. It has been a little bit of a shift, but those ones still have very particular buyers. The thing with that is, though, that when the price goes up on the property, so does being more judicious about it, having your parameters shrunk, looking at it a lot more carefully, a whole bunch of other things in the buyer's mind. So when you have these type of properties, these buyers are looking at it way differently, and they want it to fit a lot better. And so that's something that you're going to have to deal with. Now, necessarily saying that you need to go out and subdivide them or entitle them or anything like that, I would say is not accurate either. However, we have talked for a very, very long time in the past. It's in our courses and everything that we put out there about subdivisions and entitlements. It's a great way to make money. I've shown you guys deals that we've done it on. It's a great thing to do. But to be able to sit there and say that you have to target those deals only is not true. Obviously, when they come across, when we get them, we do them all the time. It's something that we highly value. They are amazing deals. They're some of the best deals that you're going to do. That will be true in any single market, right? Because anytime that you can take something that's this and make it better, or something that's 1 and make it 10, it's obviously going to have more value. So that's true regardless of the market. So why are many jumping ship based on all this? Well, basically what we just discussed in the last 10 minutes is something that they're not looking at because, again, they don't have clear perspective on it. They don't have the right perception because they've only known one thing. And maybe some of you that have only been around for a few years and have been watching things, you keep hearing the same things, right? You keep hearing, buy it for this, assign it really quick, double close it really quick, whatever it may be, make X, move on, just keep doing it over and over and over. And that's becoming harder and harder to do. So you got to be more judicious in your buying. You got to get better prices. You got to be looking at a different type of buyer buying the property, putting them out there and having those ones reach out to you, right? You've got to be looking at not just flipping to builders. You've got to be looking at a wider thing. So yes, it takes more effort. It takes more work, right? But we're getting to that point now where we were at, 12 years ago or so, where buying was very easy and selling became difficult. That's where we were. It was before you could buy properties that were worth $10,000 for $500 or $1,000. That's a true story. You could buy properties that were worth $50,000 for $10,000, $5,000. Absolutely true. But you never get $10,000 for the $10,000 piece of property. You never get $50,000 for the $50,000 piece of property. You needed to have them discounted. You needed to massage people and nurture them and all that to get that buyer along, right? And so you'd be selling them at a discount. Well, what we saw in just recent years was completely the opposite. If you had a $10,000 piece of property, you had people lined up to pay $10,000. You had a $50,000 piece of property, you'd sell it almost immediately for that price, but you would never get it at that steep of a discount. You weren't buying them for $1,000 anymore. If it was $10,000 piece of property, you'd be paying $4,000 for it, right? If it was a $50,000 piece of property, you might be paying $30,000, $35,000 for it and be happy to be walking away with a $15,000 payday. In a lot of cases, it may be even less. People were doing 40 to 50, things like that, and they're just making 10 grand. That was the situation that existed. So selling was very easy, but buying became difficult. And we're going to start seeing that swing now. We're already starting to see it, where buying is becoming easier. More sellers are willing to give up. Their properties aren't worth as much. They're nervous, all these things. So we're starting to see that positive traction going the other way for that, but you can't have the best of both worlds. So obviously selling becomes more difficult. And when selling becomes more difficult, well, in that case, now you need to be looking at these other ways of doing things. So are we jumping ship? Absolutely not. Are our students jumping ship? Absolutely not. Do you need to have a different mindset doing this going into 2025 than you did, a few years ago? Absolutely. And again, if you don't believe that I'm just tackling this right now, you might be saying, well, you're just saying this because it's what's there right now. No, go into the Facebook group that we have. Go look at some of the previous posts that I made from a year, 2 years ago. Go watch some of these videos from a year or 2 years ago. Genus and I have been talking about this up and down because we knew it was coming, because we've lived through it already and we've seen it. So it's going to create some great opportunities for investors, because the ones that stick with it are going to do so much better because there's going to be much less competition. But it is going to involve a little bit more work, but that's fine, because if you're willing to do that, you have so much opportunity. So hopefully that makes sense to a lot of you. We'd love to hear your feedback. Feel free to comment below if you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook or anywhere. If you're listening to this on Spotify or any other podcast, feel free to leave comments as well. Make sure you join our Facebook group if you're not already in it. The link is below there to join that as well. And obviously being able to be part of that community, ask questions, and see exactly what we're talking about here. So thank you, everybody, for joining us on this episode of Crushing Land, and we'll catch you next time.